A couple of ways, and then we just use these on pretty much any deal, but particularly with owner carry deals as far as ways to lower the down payment. The security deposits should always transfer over to you as the new owner of the property. What's that? Did you want to flip that? Oh, did you just switch to? Oh, perfect. Got it. Okay, right now we're talking about 3 ways to lower the down payments. In this next section of video. Thanks, you guys, for putting up with some of this stuff. We're okay. Okay. We'll get you all to do the part later on where you have the whole audience there, like clapping and looking like this. Like, have you ever seen that before? It's like a whole hired. They have them sometimes on the TV shows and things. And look at that! It cleans 3 times faster, and then you see the audience, and everybody's just like. Okay, getting back to real estate. Security deposits. All the security deposits should come to you. In your due diligence, you're going to take the step to go through and verify those. We even take the step to go through and, in addition to looking at the accounting that the property has, we'll take the step to have the tenants fill out a sheet where they tell us what they think that their security deposit is. No, this can be used in all situations. But it's one of the things with an owner carry deal. If we go in and put together an owner carry deal with maybe 10% down in owner carry, we're going to use these 3 things to reduce the amount of money that we need to be bringing to the table. Closing on the 3rd of the month. If you're the new buyer and you close on the 3rd, the rents are due on the 1st, and you should get a credit from the 3rd of the month to the end of the month for all of the rents that should have been paid. And I've made the mistake before of having the seller say, oh, well, so-and-so, this tenant and that tenant, they'll pay, they're good for it, you can just collect it later. Really the best way to do it is to say, no, we're closing, and if you didn't collect something on the 1st when it was due to you, it's up to you, you can go collect it, but we're doing the deal based upon this. Is kind of a little bit of the more hard-nosed way to do it. If you can't get the 3rd, if you can do the 5th or the 10th, you're better off. And really at some point you get into this discussion of, well, does it really matter that much? Because at some point you're just going to be at the end of the month and it's going to all even out. But I like to get in and to a deal with as little money as possible. Repair allowances are something that we've had a lot of fun with. Repair allowance is as simple as having something that came up either you knew about when you put the property under contract, or a lot of times it's things that you discovered during an inspection of the property where, gosh, we didn't realize there was hail damage to the roof, it's going to need a new roof, and so we need X amount of money. And there's a couple of different ways you can get it. You can get it as a credit at closing. If you get it as a credit at closing, it's less money for you to bring to the closing table. You can also have the seller actually pay you at closing for that, where you're walking away with a check. And Peter Harris is I don't know how he does it. He's helped our commercial mentoring students to get millions of dollars in repair allowances. Every time I see one, it's over $100,000, $118,000, $210,000 in where you close on a property and you basically get that money to kind of be in your bank account to start off into your deal. Ideally, the repair allowance that you get is going to be for repairs that don't necessarily need to be done immediately. So if you think about it, if you've got a repair allowance for repaving the parking lot and you close on the property, can you patch the potholes and get by for a year or two before you end up needing to use that money for the repair allowance? I've even taken it to the point before where with a property where we got a repair allowance for the roof and we just got by and patched the roof for the 5 or 6 years that we owned the property, and then we had the roof repaired 2 weeks prior to selling it, and then we use the proceeds from the sale to pay off the contractor who did the roof. So we use a repair allowance to have less money going in, never needed to use that money, and then ended up fixing the roof as part of selling the property to the next buyer. Make sense? All right. Creative funding strategies, moving on. A master lease. Master lease is one of my favorite methods of buying property. It's also a fun way to sell property. And with a commercial master lease, you're going to lease the entire property, and you're also going to get an option to buy the property, typically a little bit below its current value, or maybe even about at the value that the current owner thinks that the property has. Commercial master lease is effective in this marketplace because you do have loans out there where maybe the lender doesn't want to cooperate with you taking title of the property, or you have a property where in its existing condition and the way it's being operated, that property does not qualify for the type of loan you'd like to put on that property. So with a master lease, one of the things that's nice about it is you get to take over, really the ownership is what you're taking over if you do it correctly, but the full operation of the property, you can go in, increase the rents, fix up things, get the property into better condition so that when you do bring in your permanent financing at that point in time, your lender is looking at a property that has is run better, has a higher NOI and that type of thing. Does that make sense? So it's a good way to do that. Now, a nice thing with a commercial master lease is the owner gets, it's all negotiable, but typically, if you can offer this and have the deal make sense, to the owner, they're going to get about what they've been getting on average over the past 2 or 3 years. So if you have a property where maybe it's a lazy landlord, the rents are low, they haven't been doing a good job of managing the property, they've got property managers that really haven't run a tight ship, and they've been getting X amount of income from that property, which is going to vary. It's going to be less one month, more another month. But on average, their net operating income is what they've been getting. You figure out what that is over the previous couple years, and you say to them, we'll give you the same net operating income, but you don't have to worry about it. And you get an easy sale of the property where they don't have to pay a what? Well, they don't have to pay capital gains tax until you actually take title of the property. That's correct. But they also don't have to pay the who? The realtor. And I've paid lots of realtors. I've paid lots of commissions. As the buyer, who pays the commission? Well, the seller does, but really it's the buyer's money. So I look at it as if you're the buyer, you're paying it. And I've gladly paid it from both sides. So I don't have a problem with paying a realtor, particularly if they're helping out or I'm busy or they can get a higher or better price for a property. But it's amazing how many people see that as like a critical thing, and if they can do a deal and sell their property without paying the broker's commissions, they see that as a tremendous win. And I think that's good. So you as the investor get, if you structure it correctly, the way I'll show you how to do, a nothing down deal. Does it necessarily have to be a nothing down deal? Can you do a master lease and pay a down payment? Or certainly if you were selling, you'd want to get a down payment, right? What if you had a master lease in this environment where lending is tighter to get? In order to get the seller to agree to the deal, you gave them 10% down. Could you do a deal like that? If you didn't have the money, could you find someone that would maybe put up the money for a share of the pie? Okay, so we're starting to look at ways that we can take something that's a great way to buy a property, which is buying a property with a master lease with nothing down, but if the seller maybe needs some money to do the deal, and you can have it make sense and maybe bring an investor in, you're combining the different techniques together. Obviously, you're not going to master lease a property without the right to also buy the property. You have an option to buy the property, and if you do it the way we show you to. I know a number of you are in our commercial mentoring program here. We show you how to do the paperwork where when you get ready to take title and buy the property, there's no discussion with the seller along the lines of, well, I didn't think it was going to go up that much in value. I'm not going to sell it to you. Do you think I've ever had that discussion with anybody? Yes, but I'm a quick learner, and so we've developed a few systems that we have in place and some paperwork and documentation that when you, and that's one of the biggest risks really, either with a house or with a commercial property. If you're not on title, you need to make sure that you've done the steps that are necessary to make it where that person can't try and take unfair advantage of you and say, well, hey, thanks for taking care of my property all these years. I'm not going to sell it to you. Yes, you are. Okay? Question from Mark. Who's our microphone runner? There it is.
Question on the advantage to you as an investor in terms of the cash flow that you would get from this deal. You would get the increases in the NOI, right? But the existing NOI would go to the seller. So it really would depend. I mean, it would be a great deal for you if that increase is significant, right?
That's your goal, is to find a property with an upside. Depending on the property and what's going on, let's say that you had a deal where, because of the way you structured it, you were getting the equity pay down on the loan, and most of that net operating income that you gave to the seller was going to pay the loan down. So you'd have a property that maybe wouldn't create a big cash flow, but was building equity every single month that you're operating the property. So you're going to look at the factors that what you're paying the seller is going to have to make sense the same way as if you were making loan payments, and that's almost how we look at it. It's almost like you're paying interest to the seller. You're not. It's a lease payment, but it's almost like you're paying interest only to the seller as whatever you agreed to pay them as a lease payment. From the seller's advantage, they have the benefit of having a property that was kind of all over the place, where some months they'd make money, some months they'd have to put money in. One of the things that you do with a master lease is you spread that out, where you say, hey, we're going to give you the same solid every single month, your same payment every single month. So, Mary Jean.
Is that better? My question is, if you could just explain the difference between existing financing and master lease.
Sure.
I don't have that straight yet.
Sure. And my fault. I went over that too quickly, and I kind of blurred them together. A great question. The difference between buying a property, leaving the existing financing in place, and a master lease is, with a master lease, there's actually you're not technically buying the property, you're leasing the property. You have a lease that gives you the full rights to run the property, collect the rents, increase the rents. You're also responsible for paying all the taxes and maintenance and repair, and you're basically stepping into the owner's shoes, but you're doing it as a master tenant. The reason it's a master tenant is because your lease also has a clause in it that says you have the right to sublease the units and rent them out, which is you're going to operate the property doing that. When you buy the property, leaving the existing financing in place, I want to say come to a closing. You might even have a closing if you're doing a master lease, but you have the seller deed the property over to you. So if you go down and look at the courthouse in a master lease, it's going to still show the previous owner as owning that property. Which, by the way, as a master lease, who gets the tax depreciation? The previous owner does. That's not why people do deals. Someone might look at that, or they might not. I found that people don't tend to do deals for tax benefits solely. tends to confuse them, and then they end up saying, well, let me check with my accountant before I do anything. That's why I tend not to bring up tax stuff when I'm trying to put a deal together. You would also, if you're doing it correctly, you would have your agreement recorded, and there's something called a performance mortgage that we use to secure our interest and things. So you've in effect, through the use of a lease and an option, you're controlling the ownership of that property, and you to a certain degree are the owner of that property. You haven't taken title yet, but you to a certain degree are the owner of the property. It's almost with single-family houses, they do it with commercial properties too. They call it a land contract, where you're making the payments, and as soon as you make all your payments, you get the title. Go away and turn the switch off. Okay. With a subject to deal, you're taking title, you're the owner, you've bought the property. The only thing that you haven't done is you have not paid off that underlying loan. So you've bought the property, and you're going to send the payments to that underlying loan just like it was your loan, but it's not. It's still in the previous owner's name. So the previous owner has the risk when you buy it subject to the existing financing that if you don't make those payments, that the owner could be in a little bit of trouble. So if you're ever selling a property and someone wants to do one of these methods, which would be better for you if you're selling a property? Which would be preferred? Master lease puts you in a little better position if they don't pay, if you're selling the property. If you did sell it subject to the existing financing, you would do what's known as a wrap mortgage, where rather than just letting someone take over your payments, they basically have to send the payments to you, and then you pay the seller. But it's written up in a way where you actually have another mortgage that wraps around it, where you have the right to foreclose if they don't pay you. Okay? Did I muddle that up enough? One of the nice things about a commercial master lease is it gives you the ability to buy the property or not buy the property. I mean, let's face it, one of the risks that you take with a commercial property is you go into it and maybe there's not the upside there, or the something, or the gangs, or the crime problem, or there's just something that you wish you'd known before you got into the deal. With a commercial master lease, you have the option to buy or not, typically at the end of the deal, although we structure them sometimes where you have an out once a year. The other thing that's interesting with a commercial master lease is that if you look carefully at the language in the documents, and if you've crafted it that way, oftentimes in a lease, the way that you get out of a lease is you just stop making your payments on the lease, because the remedy for the owner of the property is they terminate the lease and they take the property back over. Now, obviously, you need to be careful how you structure this, and you don't want it to affect your credit and that type of thing, but if you do it correctly, it's always interesting to look at an agreement and say, okay, what does this really mean? Okay, well, this is a 5-year lease. That means you have to pay for 5 years. Well, what happens if I don't pay? Okay, depending on who wrote the documents, sometimes it can make a difference, which is why we always like to have that little clause that says, buyer agrees to pay for preparation of all documents. Because who do we like to have preparing the documents? Us. We prepare all the documents ahead of time, send them to the closing table. You go to the closing table. The official title person's there going, okay, here's the documents. Sign here, do this, do that. And it's great. Make sense? Yes. You do.
With the master lease, where you're promising the owner the same NOI, do you have a strategy to reduce your cost, the operating cost, from day one, or do you accept a negative cash flow for a while until you can bring the cost under control?
Well, if you are paying them their existing net operating income, you should be break even, right?
Depends on if they, were paying management fees out of their operating expenses or not.
Right, but if they were paying management fees, then that reduces their net operating income, and that's Oh, I see what you're saying. If maybe they were self-managing and then
Right.
you're hiring manager, you're right. You're right.
So you
yeah,
would
I
have
mean, you're
some
going to look at
out-of-pocket
that.
costs for a small
You could.
tenant.
You're going to look at it. You're going to look at that and decide. Typically, we're looking for properties with some upside where the rents are low or been mismanaged, or we like to have some inefficiencies or some things that we can do right away. We might go in and start doing a bill back right away on the utilities for the tenants, for example. And know that we're not going to collect on all those, but if we can collect on 60% of the utilities, does that increase our NOI?